I'm going to caveat and say that I knew little to nothing about Hermeticism before we chose this text. But I have been doing research to learn what it is and where it came from and stuff so that I would know. Because when I didn't do that last time reading about Aristotle, I got confused. So, did some
Yeah.
research so that I would understand what is the Kybalion, where did it come from, what came before the Kybalion, that sort of thing. Um, what I found interesting, because I can't remember who recommended the Kybalion, was that this isn't even one of the original main texts of the philosophy. This one was written in 1908
Hmm.
by three dudes who were like, "We are the initiates." Here are some of my notes you can see on screen of to remind me of things to bring up. In that I was like, "Who is this dude?" They claim wrote all this
Three
stuff, and he's
dudes.
well. So the dude who
No, you
Hermes,
wrote three dudes.
I did. Um, so like Hermes the Bibbe, the Trismegistus, seems to be an amalgamate of Hermes, the Greek god, and Thoth, the Egyptian god. Um, a lot of times historically, it looks like I'm just throwing out some facts I learned in my research. Historically, people tend to apply Hermetics to the all of Egyptian philosophy, but that really is a false application of the term and didn't really start being used until somewhere between 1500 and 1800. Um, Hermeticism, as we know it, kind of got popular around the Renaissance when it had a revival and people were trying to kind of make it into a more concise sort of doctrine, I guess, or just newly digestible, I guess, stuff like that. And there you go. That's my approximate background knowledge of Hermeticism based on all my research. The introduction is effectively the three dudes going, "Yo, this is good truth, dog. Hermes be legit, and he is the great reconciler of all truths. So it real good." Um,
I found the claim really astounding that Hermes has been basically not the founder, but the
mhm.
teacher or the inspirer of all uh, major religions, or so to speak. So,
Yeah, they gave him credit for pretty much any truth that has ever truthed.
yeah,
It is Hermes. uh,
that's that's wild. Yeah.
and these dudes who put this book together claim to be some of the initiates of their generation, and that there are some in every generation. And they are super close to Hermes. They friends, yo. And let's see. Then they talk a bit more about that, what the book's about, and that oh yeah, and the spirit of persecution has not yet died out in the land. There are certain Hermetic teachings which, if publicly promulgated, would bring down upon the teachings a great cry of scorn and revilement from the multitude. So they definitely got a martyr thing going on. Um,
Yeah, they're very serious.
they're
I
very serious. Take themselves very seriously.
Which is fair. I respect it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unique. All sorts
Yeah.
of religions and philosophies take themselves very seriously. It was just interesting to get a glimpse of that here in the introduction. My notes for chapter one include who Hermes? Question mark exclamation mark. Um, and I believe my general thought process was they are giving you their version of background knowledge on who Hermes is and all of the stuff that goes together. You guys are welcome to butt in anytime you want. I'm just gonna talk.
What I find what struck me or what I find impressive is that they don't claim any knowledge about his life. That they
Mhm.
say, okay, it basically was millennia ago, and nobody knows what was going on, which is
Yeah.
very different to what generally is going on with founders of philosophies and or religions. I mean,
Yeah,
they at least have some myth going on about his life, but they say no, we don't know,
we don't
which
know.
I find very interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, they're very much it's a secret, it's a mystery. The as far as I can tell, at least I haven't read the other Hermetic texts, but at least in the Kybalion, they do lean very heavily. And I circled the word secret here because they use it a lot throughout.
Yeah.
They use like it's secret, it's mysterious, nobody knows. You can only know when you've like ascended. They don't use the word ascended, but
But when you are a
when
worthy
you're
student,
worthy, when you're pure enough, or when you've really absorbed all the principles, you get to understand the secret, I guess. Um, so that's been interesting. I do appreciate that they. I had a lot of like in my mind, like I wonder how this grew alongside Christianity because they're kind of developing at the same era in kind of similar areas. So I was curious. I don't think they had a huge impact. I don't know. It's really I'm unclear about the impact on each other. I think that's going to warrant some more investigation for me to understand. Um, Hermes is super cool, according to them. Christianity is a baby religion, according to them as well. The church is now struggling to get back to its ancient mystic teachings. Someone else underlined, it was written down at all. Its meaning was veiled in terms of alchemy and astrology, so that only those possessing the key could read it all aright. They're very much like you have to be given the or have achieved this the power level, the understanding level. Um, I want to say that one resource I found referred to it as the scepter of power. That you have to have the scepter of power in order to really absorb the teachings.
I think the scepter is mentioned in this book as well. Maybe even
Yeah,
in the upcoming chapter
yeah,
1 or 2. I think one of the principles they say if you have grasped this principle, you have the scepter or something like that.
yeah. If you have this principle down pat, you got the scepter of power. I think that might be the second one, the second principle, or the third one.
Mhm.
Um,
One
yeah.
thing before we go on, one thing I
Mhm.
marked down is they are very uh, they are very adamant that it needs to be. It's on the page 19 here.
Mhm.
This because of the warning of the ancient teachers against allowing the secret doctrine to become crystallized into a creed. So they're basically saying, yeah, it's the moment this becomes static and just, you know, repeating words without actually practicing and stuff
Mhm.
and turning it into a religion is, in a sense, a perversion of the teaching and does not is not helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very mystical in nature. Very keep it mystical. Secret once again. There was a compilation of certain basic Hermetic doctrines passed on from teacher to student, which was known as the Kybalion. I feel like they made this up. I'm gonna be honest. I started reading this part, and after I did other research, I don't know. They don't really. The Kybalion seems to be born at the writing of this book, not. I don't know. It was just interesting.
Oh.
I didn't have much else about this chapter. It's just
Mm.
a lot of introduction up to this point. Like chapter 1 is just kind of setting the stage of like we know what we're talking about. We know what's up. Here are all these things you should know. You know the things cuz we know the things.
Uh-huh.
Um from my I put distilled from corpus. So there's like three other texts that are like the major corpus of Hermeticism or the major body of work that Hermetics refer to. And in fact, if we were like, I'm going to be a Hermetic, this is not the first book you're supposed to read. Based on all the research I did. If you are like, oh my goodness, I'm ready to be a Hermetic, you're supposed to read the Emerald Tablet first. To
Oh,
get
right.
it,
Yeah.
yeah, you're supposed to read that one first, and then there's two others whose name I have forgotten already. But everything in here in the Kybalion seems to, like, before this, never really been put into a list. Like, this book is the first time it's really put into a list, or at least it's the only list anyone ever refers to when they're saying the seven principles. So these three guys who wrote this book seem to be the dudes who made up the list based on all the other teachings. Not that they're not teachings in Hermeticism, just that they hadn't been put in a list like this before.
Mhm.
Um, and so we got the principle of mentalism, principle of correspondence, principle of vibration, principle of polarity, the principle of rhythm, principle of cause effect, and the principle of gender. I was like, what at first, and then I realized that the principle of gender and the principle of correspondence are not that different, and also the polarity one. Like all of these are almost the same. Some of these, and
They
so,
are pointing in similar directions, I
yes,
agree.
yeah, they're pointing in very similar directions. I thought principle one was very Buddhist for the most part.
Um, yeah, and or Buddhist and Vedantic as well. I mean, there on the page 26 on the bottom. Um,
26 over here.
but in short, that is apparent. All that is apparent is spirit, which in itself is unknowable and undefinable.
Mm.
And that is very Vedantic, like the idea of Brahman, which is also
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
unknowable and all that. And it's also the base reality of everything. So there's definitely a correspondence there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um. As Yes. So they're just establishing the mental nature of the universe, but then stuff with one. But so two is where you get probably one of the most famous phrases from Hermeticism, because I've heard it a ton before doing this research,
Yeah,
which was as above, so below, with effectively this idea that you study the world as you see it in order to understand the divine. Because I think, bear with me, they are supposed to be reflections of each other.
seems that way. Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of what I got there. But yeah, also there's like a creepy movie you can watch with this title
Oh,
that
I
I've
didn't know
seen.
that.
It's a creepy little horror movie. It's a bit of a trip. It's interesting. Um, which looking back now, I can see more of these ideas were in that movie than I realized. Like I didn't realize it played into Hermeticism so thoroughly. I thought it just used anyway. So I almost want to rewatch it to see what they actually grabbed after I finish reading this book. Um,
Do
so
we need
that's
to have like book club viewing party?
Book club viewing party. Now that we've read
Like
this book, we're gonna watch this movie.
then
Okay,
finish this
guys.
book and then watch the and then decide.
And we're like, all right,
Watch
how
the
hermetic
movie
was
of the
that?
book. Yeah.
3, vibrations. Everything is vibrations. Everything is in motion. There are different
Yeah,
kinds of vibrations, but they're all the
that's
same.
again very related to yogic mysticism, who also say that everything is sound or vibration. Yeah,
Hmm.
another idea which is there, reflected there, that is, so to speak.
The principle of polarity felt very dualistic. Um,
But is it though? Because they basically say although there are opposites, opposites are really this on the same scale, so to speak. So
yeah, like hot or cold is just the absence of hot, like less hot.
I mean, yeah, both cold and hot are both temperature, different
Yeah.
names we give for different states of temperature, but it's all temperature in the end. So, and
Hmm.
as they say, you cannot put a point or put a finger on where the one ends and the other begins.
This principle also tends to play into a phrase I heard a lot while doing the research, which was that all truths are half truths.
Mm.
Um, because anything you say is only half of what's happening, right? So, it's hot outside. Well, the other half of that involves the lack of cold outside, sort of thing, to put it really, really simplistically.
Yeah, or what you consider hot may not be hot for someone else.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point as well. Um,
So I think it may be pointing to a bit of a relativism.
mhm. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Maybe some relativism. Oh, all in your mind. Why did I write that? um, Principle 5. Oh wait, what is 4? Did I 4? Oh, that was
Yep.
the
Or
polarity.
yeah, polarity. Yeah.
Yeah, that was 4. And then number 5 was a rhythm, which seems similar to vibrations to me. Um, well, but also is different. Okay, so this is where was interesting to me. So this pendulum like movement, I think is actually a mentality though that I've heard seep into a lot of social talking here in the US at least and maybe in other countries as well. But socially speaking, a lot of people will be like, yeah, everything swings back to the other extreme constant like, right? Oh, this has become a very permeated idea in culture of we start at one extreme only to swing back to the other extreme. We hear that. I hear that about education, about government, and about all sorts of things. Is that we're always swinging back and forth between two extremes. So it was interesting to me to see it here and realize I think how Hermeticism thought has maybe really affected more in my life than I realized. Depending on where the origins of this thought process actually are, or if they come from Hermeticism or not.
Yeah.
But I've heard that actually a ton in my life growing up. So
Yeah, I haven't heard that actually, but it's interesting that it's such a prevalent thought over yonder.
at least where I was growing up.
Hmm.
Um,
I can second that. I
yeah,
also live in America, and yeah, I hear that a lot.
yeah. It's like it's just believed to be this truth, right? Like, oh, we're always gonna swing back to the other extreme.
Yeah, especially with like politics and like
Mm-hmm.
anything of like, I don't know, it's just brought up a lot.
Yeah, it's weird. When I read this, I was like, oh, I think this is where this came from. So anyway, it was just weird. Cause and effect, fairly obvious. On what it is. They titled it well. Play the game of life. All right, guys. Movers instead of pawns. So I do appreciate this only because it harkens back to an old mentality of mine. Um, of You gotta rise above the plane and play the game of life and become a player instead of a pawn. Anyway, this is an old like edgelord thought process I had back in middle school. So nice to see it in a book. The principle of gender, I was like, what is this going to be about? When I started reading it, and then it made more sense. It effectively just seemed kind of a yin yang sort of thing of, ah, there's a little bit of this and that in everything. And so they do tend to, based on some of the research I did, categorize all sorts of things as masculine or feminine, but then all of those things are in everything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's also something that I marked that there isn't, again, no absolute male and female, but everyone has both aspects in them.
Yeah, yeah. And that ends the amount of pages we were gonna go over this week. I think the number of pages I said we were reading looked daunting, but when you actually read it, it's not that thick of a read.
No, it wasn't
And
very long part.
and but I'll tell you what took longer than anything was the other research I was doing to try to understand what Hermeticism was, because like I said, I hadn't really done digging into it. It's something I was aware that existed, but I hadn't like, well, what is Hermeticism? And I still don't feel like I understand what Hermeticism is. I'm in a better place than I was,
Should
but
we read that other book, the other text instead first?
uh I
Will it make
like
more sense or less
no, I don't think it'll make more sense. I think reading the other text only makes sense as if you want to be a hermetic.
sense? Okay.
The Kybalion is actually, from what I've heard from other researchers and people, is that it actually is a very distilled concept of
Mm,
ideas. Like it's a good little um,
Summary.
summary and sampling
yeah.
of the doctrine. I
Okay.
think that if we were like, man, I really want to deep dive into Hermeticism, yeah, go read the other texts. But I don't personally feel like I'm up to reading all the other texts. Um,
Uh-huh.
I'm not against finishing this book. It's interesting. The things I'm learning and the things I'm kind of seeing how they might have permeated into my day to day life are interesting. But
So we're not going to be the few initiates in this generation.
I mean, you could be if you want. You could be an initiate. I don't know how many initiates there are. It's not a. I don't think it's a crazy popular philosophy. I think a
I
lot of
would.
the.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say a lot of the ideas obviously overlap. I think into other ideas, as many philosophy do. When the goal is to be basically a good person, I find that a lot of thought processes end up in the same place.
But as you just said, it isn't a very popular philosophy. As we learned, the truth is only for a select few, so it's obviously not going to be very uh, popular because, according to the book itself, most people won't be able to really understand the stuff anyway.
Yeah, it seems to thrive on being a bit obfuscated. Um, of it is the edge lord of philosophies. No one understands me, man.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Something that I think is kind of interesting with, like, you're saying all these. I didn't finish reading it, but
Mm.
I was listening to the audiobook,
Mhm.
and some of the comments, people, like, almost all of the comments that people were making on there were like, it's in a different way than what you've done, where you've connected what you experienced and went, oh, so maybe the source of that thing is actually from this philosophy and it's permeated like all of these different areas of life. And instead, in the comments section, they seem to take that as, because this sounds like something that I've experienced, it means it is true and this is the way. And this is like,
Ah.
I feel like that's quite dangerous.
Yeah.
And
I also see that a lot within the whole like community a lot. Like
Mhm.
a lot of yeah. Basically agreeing, yeah.
just a human thing to do maybe, but it's like a
Yeah.
confirmation of maybe they want it to be true or they aren't
Mm.
really thinking it. I mean, I guess that's a problem. You're not really engaging with it and thinking through and wondering if that is the reason why or if there might be another reason why. Like you're going, oh, well, my assumption is that somehow this philosophy has just been carried through all the way to that particular thing. And how funny that my experience reflected that idea from thousands of years ago. And instead, they're just like, no, this is the truth. Not that it's just a thing that is present, but that it is inherently then the only thing that could be true and the only way that it could have arrived.
Feel,
I
Yeah,
don't know.
the truth with like a capital T.
Yeah.
but I feel like you have these kinds of comments under every
Yeah, you definitely do.
video of every philosophy or religion. Who you have some people saying, "Oh yeah, this is the way," and blah blah blah.
Yeah,
I
and I
guess,
feel like that also can sometimes have a hard time with like people will get really into something and they'll be like, this is the truth. And then the second they actually digest it, sometimes it kind of like, I don't know, becomes less interesting because
Mm.
they see the truth as more of a truth, as in like, yeah, that's true. But there's also like always going to be that movement within it. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, seems makes sense.
Sometimes the
but
people who are the loudest about that sort of thing tend to be the sort to jump onto the next exciting movement they can
mm,
find, like um that sounds fancy and sparkly and new and interesting, and then they move on.
or they just start getting like deep into conspiracy theories or something. But the thing that was, I guess, the thing that struck me most is I do watch some other like philosophy and religious videos, not
Mm-hmm.
all the time,
Mhm.
but from the ones I've seen, the kinds of comments are usually more varied. So
Okay.
people might talk about a specific thing that was in the video, or they
Mhm.
might just write generally like, "Oh, I was having a hard time finding this. Thanks for posting it." Or they would talk about something adjacent to it. I don't know. Maybe they're trying to have conversations with people. It was just that struck me as strange that all of the comments I read were literally just like, "This is the truth," and
This
it
is
sounded
the
very
truth.
culty.
Yeah, that
It
is
sounded like
interesting.
I was in conspiracy theory internet corner. Like,
I think due to the lack of popularity with Hermeticism, it's going to draw a certain flavor of audience member who is probably looking for the truth, right?
or like you
And
said, it's like the edge lord philosophy.
a little, yeah.
Like it's kind of it has well in the way of it has like an exclusionary bend to it, right?
Yeah, it's
It's
Yeah.
not.
Mm-hmm.
as you mentioned it, I was thinking, yeah, you can give yourself a bit of an elitist air when you're saying
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I'm into this really obscure and strange philosophy, and it's not for
Mhm.
everyone, but it's for me, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Also because I get it and I have the scepter of power, and you're not good enough
Right.
to understand the truth and hear the truth. Like, I mean, I think that's maybe that's a thing.
Mhm.
That
I could see
kind of
that.
person who wants that is who's finding it in this age, right?
Mhm.
But or at least the ones who are commenting.
I think that if I had done a deep dive into Hermeticism when I was much younger, I absolutely would have been pulled into this. Like,
Yeah. I
like that.
find a
There.
lot I find a lot of people my age and younger really into Hermeticism.
Mm,
Really?
Yeah.
weird.
I mean I've met like a few people who get really into it and I find the people that seem to be uh very into it will be into it really into it, and then they'll kind of understand, okay, like, it's not the truth. And then once they kind of get of like, okay, it's not the truth, they'll rather lose interest. Not saying for everyone, but or they'll start to kind of understand it and be able to apply it more. I think a lot of the comments and stuff are people who are like just finding into it and really into it. And then it kind of, I don't know, kind of like the pendulum movement. It kind of moves around. I don't know.
Yeah, that could be. That might explain why they weren't being very specific about any of it, like versus watching certain other philosophies where people will discuss specific parts of like a specific um, teaching or a specific comment from the video, or they'll share a story of theirs that was relevant to it or something. And this, if they're new to it, that might explain why they're just kind of saying, like, ah, yes, yes, this is the truth,
Yeah.
instead of
I
actually
mean,
like
I get it. I
going
get it.
into it.
It's interesting when you first get into it. You're like, whoa, this is cool. So, like,
Yeah, just different. I don't think I've known anybody who's mentioned being into this philosophy at all. So
Me neither.
I think that a lot of the ideas from this philosophy make their way into a very new age mindset.
yeah.
Um, so I've
Yeah,
definitely heard
that's where I've
flavors.
encountered it most.
Yeah. I've heard sprinklings of these exact ideas come out of the mouths of people I know, but I don't think I know anyone who's like, I'm hermetic. Like I would argue though the people I've heard using some of these philosophies in discussion don't realize where they came from originally.
Yeah.
that seems to be the argument that they make in the introduction as well, isn't it? That they, oh, hold on a second.
Yeah. Uh but also if you're a special snowflake like they said in the introduction then you are part of the scepter of power wielding people. So if you're like, "Oh, I know where the truth came from." So maybe we are initiates. Go us.
No, but I mean, I also think like a pendulum as an analogy doesn't necessarily come from this. It could just
No,
become
no,
Yeah, it
yeah.
could just be an analogy.
Right, it's a very good analogy. It makes sense. But I could see like culturally its popularization really hitting hard because of this. Because our especially here in the US, we've gone through such waves of like interest in the mystic and the occult.
Yeah, I specifically am around a lot of people that are into the occult, so I think I'm more like I hear it more often just because that's the type of people that I listen to.
Mhm. I don't know. It's all interesting to me. Uh, I like I don't know. It's cool.
Yeah, I don't know.
a brother of a friend of mine was really into was apparently a hermetic. He was like
Huh.
but I don't know him personally, so even though there's like a person of a person I know, I know no one personally who's into it.
Okay. Okay. Any more thoughts on Hermeticism for this week, guys? All right, go team. We did it.